Hi there. In this video I'm going to be taking you through my Steely Dan vinyl collection. Now for those who might not know who Steely Dan are, it was a musical project by two college friends, Donald Fagen and Walter Becker. They started out as songwriters for hire in New York before moving out to LA to work for a publishing company writing songs to order. Eventually they got sick of that, so they decided we want to start our own thing. So they drafted in a few friends from back in New York and a few LA session players, and they formed the band Steely Dan. And their first album came out in 1972, and it was an album called Can't Buy a Thrill. So this album kind of burst onto the scene, and they had two big hits immediately with the songs Do It Again and Really in the Years. Do It Again is a kind of a slinky, funky record that features a wonderful electric sitar solo by one of the guitar players, Denny Diaz. Really in the Years is a very famous song. It has it was very popular on the radio when I was growing up. And of course, in musician circles, it's most famous for the ripping guitar solo from the session player Elliot Randall, who was again a friend of theirs from back in New York City. Apparently, the story goes that the two main guitar players in Steely Dan had tried solos, but it wasn't quite cutting it for Fagen and Becker. So they called Elliot Randall, kind of foreshadowing their love of parachuting in top session people to do a specific musical task. So they got Elliot in, and he performed an absolutely classic solo on the song Really in the Years. That's constantly topping polls for the best solo of all time. Famously, Jimmy Page said it was one of his favorite solos. But the album isn't just those two songs. There's it's mainly a kind of a very soulful, jazzy pop album. One of the members' early days was a vocalist called David Palmer. He was brought in because Donald Fagen had been the lead singer up until that point, but he was self-conscious about his voice. And he felt that having David Palmer there, who had a kind of a more commercial sounding voice, that would sell the songs a bit better than his own voice. So he features on a song called Dirty Work, which has kind of gained cult status in recent years. Going down through the tracks, Kings is a kind of a pounding piano pop song with another great solo by Elliot Randall. Midnight Cruiser and Only a Fool Would Say That are both kind of soulful pop songs. Only a Fool has a kind of a slight bossa nova feel. Then over on side two, you have other great tracks like Change of the Guard and Brooklyn Owes the Charmer Under Me. Very much kind of in that kind of early 70s soulful pop sound. There was hints on this album definitely of the kind of bitter and sarcastic worldview that Fagen and Becker would highlight in their lyrics going forward. But really, this is kind of a nice entry point into the world of Steely Dan. They don't lay on the jazz too hard. This next album, this is called Countdown to Ecstasy. This is the second album by Steely Dan, and for me, this is where their jazz influence really came to the fore, especially on the opening track, Bodhisattva. It's for all the world like a rock and roll band doing a big swing, big band arrangement. Lots of stabs, a real heavy shuffle feel, fast frenetic solos, lots of showpieces. It's kind of a riff more than a song, you know, which a lot of the classic swing band numbers were. But again, there's a lot of great soulful pop songs like Razor Boy. The Boston Rag features some great bluesy guitar playing from Skunk Baxter. Your Gold Teeth is a real early 70s jazz fusion kind of song. And then over to side two, you have the song Showbiz Kids, which was famously sampled in the 90s by the Welsh band Super Furry Animals for one of their songs, whose name I won't say here now because my video will be taken down. Then on to My Old School. This has got a real kind of Stax, kind of dirty Southern soul kind of feel with an amazing horn arrangement. Pearl of the Quarter is almost a country and western song with great slide pedal steel playing from Skunk Baxter. And then you're back with King of the World, which is another phonetic kind of jazz rocker. For me, for a while, this was my favorite Steely Dan record. I thought it was the kind of perfect kind of mix of the early soul pop sound with the kind of jazz rock feel that they would go for in later albums. Great album, Countdown to Ecstasy. Moving on to their next album in 1974, you had an album called Pretzel Logic with this wonderful kind of offbeat cover of a pretzel vendor somewhere in New York City. This one features one of their biggest hits. It's called Ricky Don't Lose That Number. It was a very big hit for them at the time. But again, they kind of continue on delving more and more into the jazz feel with there's a song on site too called Parker's Band, which is a tribute to Charlie Parker. There's some great bluesy playing from Skunk Baxter on Night by Night, and the title track With a Gun is kind of, again, it's showing their kind of not spoken about too often. They have a real kind of country, early albums have always had one or two kind of songs with a country rock kind of feel, and for this album With a Gun fills that. But again, there's great pop songs like Any Major Dude Will Tell You, Barrytown. But again, Pretzel Logic was a big hit for them. As I say, Ricky Don't Lose That Number is probably one of the most well-known songs by them. So there you have Pretzel Logic. Now for this next album, Katie Lied. So around this time, Steely Dan had been a touring act up until this point. They had done several big tours, opening for other acts, but touring in their own right as well. And Fagen and Becker just were not road warriors. They did not like the touring life. They felt isolated from the rest of the band, who were kind of more that kind of cliched rock and roll lifestyle. Fagen and Becker are kind of classic outsiders. They would have anything that everyone else was into, they would do the opposite. So on this album, they decided we're going to just break up the band, and for future albums, we're going to do this as a studio project. No more touring, no more gigs. And this is where it started. This was them kind of dipping their toes into this world. As I said, they had session musicians up to this point. There was always a couple of cameos on every record, whether it be a guitar solo from Elliot Randall, or Rick Derringer was on Showbiz Kids. Of course, any horn players, they had several horn players. But on this one, the band was made up entirely of famous and subsequently famous session musicians. There's a list of them here I'll take you through. For example, you have the likes of Dean Parks, Elliot Randall, Hugh McCracken, and the great Larry Carlton on guitar. Some great keyboard players. David Page, who went on to be in Toto. Michael O'Mardian, who produced Christopher Cross's debut album. You have great bass players like Chuck Rainey, Wilton Felder. Of course, Chuck Rainey was Aretha Franklin's bass player. And the drums of Jeff Porcaro, who again was a founding member of Toto, but a very noted session musician. And many, many others. So this for me is very much a transitional album between that kind of early pop sound of the likes of Pretzel Logic and Countdown to Ecstasy into the more kind of very heavy jazz influenced material. Like, it kicks off with a tune called Black Friday, which is a great riffy rocker. Back in then with Bad Sneakers, which is a kind of reminds me of a lot of the material they did on Can't Buy a Thrill, soulful pop song. They continue on then, there's a great tune to finish side one called Dr. Wu. Side 2 features Chained Lightning, a nice little bluesy number. Your Gold Teeth 2, which is a sequel to the song from Countdown to Ecstasy. I suppose one player I didn't really mention, who became a pivotal part of the Steely Dan sound in the later years, was the session vocalist Michael McDonald. He pops up on a lot of the material on this album. He had toured with them on the Pretzel Logic tour, but he kind of became this kind of secret weapon in the studio where he could create this wall of vocal harmonies, and because of his such a distinctive voice, they were very much an instrument for themselves, and Steely Dan really utilized him on this album. But for my money, it's one of their best albums. It's called Katie Lied, and it's a pun on this little creature here is called a Katie Lied. It's like a little cricket kind of guy. So yeah, that's them kind of doing their little schoolboy humor for everyone. Great album, Katie Lied. Now for the following album, I believe it was in 1976. All these albums up until this point had been recorded in California with Californian-based musicians. For whatever reason, on this next album, Becker and Fagen decided they wanted to do it back in New York City, where they both had hailed from. And the album that came out of it was this one. It's called The Royal Scam. For me, it's one, as a side note, it's one of the worst album covers of all time. It just looks so cheesy. The good thing about the album is the music very much makes up for the lack of quality in the album cover. Right out of the gate, you have one of their top songs, Kid Charlemagne, which features a legendary guitar solo from session musician Larry Carlton. In fact, he does two solos. He does one on the outro as well, which is just as good in my estimation. But the first solo in Kid Charlemagne is in musician circles kind of held up as a benchmark of improvisation, in creativity, in melodic guitar playing, especially over complicated jazz harmony, which they were using on this. This wasn't, your standard kind of simple pop songs. These were very complicated, multi-sectioned songs with unpredictable melodies and unpredictable harmony. And Larry Carlton was completely up to the job. He was a monster musician. And he plays another great song on this called Don't Take Me Alive. Unusually, the song starts with a guitar solo. It's like a real statement to kind of feature Larry Carlton on that one. But you have other great songs like Silent Stranger. You've got Elliot Randall back playing guitar on that one. Green Earrings has Denny Diaz, one of their original members, back playing unbelievable bebop-inspired burner of a solo. Haitian Divorce was kind of a minor hit at the time, but it featured a very innovative studio effect. Dean Park played the guitar on it, but after he had finished, Walter Becker processed the sound using a talk box, which was a device famously used by Peter Frampton on his Frampton Comes Alive to get a kind of a wah-wah effect. Again, for a long time, this was my favorite Steely Dan album. I think because for me, it's the most guitar focused. As you can see, I'm a lover of guitars. So I always gravitated towards this one. I found it incredibly inspiring when I was getting into this kind of complicated jazz influenced material. It set me kind of milestones to hit in my own playing. So, and I constantly come back to the Royal Scam for inspiration when it comes to that kind of playing. It's just the perfect combination for me of musicianship and songwriting, and it's still one of my favorites. The Royal Scam. Now, in the year 1977, which is famously the year of punk music, where punk really came into the mainstream, Steely Dan came out with what was certainly their most accomplished record up until that point. The most lauded, the most polished, the most spoken about record in their catalogue, really. And it's this one. It's called Asia. Beautiful cover there. Real kind of pinnacle of minimalism, if you ask me, which is lovely contrast to the music, because the music is florid, it's complex, but it's incredibly melodious and harmonically rich, with amazing performances from all the musicians on the album. This album contains some absolute classics that in subsequent years in concerts were definitely the favourites. Kicks off with Black Cow, a wonderful kind of funk-inspired number about a failed relationship. So then you've got the title track, Asia. This kind of jazz magnum opus in terms of multi-sectioned, it's kind of mood-changing piece. I believe it's the longest track they ever did. It's up around the 8-minute mark, but it's a real epic song that takes you on a kind of a languid journey through this. He's describing this relationship with a woman in these exotic places. But the music is very much it's like a modern big band song. And amongst musicians, it's famous for the drumming of Steve Gadd, who apparently didn't even listen to the backing track in the studio. He just looked at the chart and just played through it. And years and years later, he heard it on the radio, and he said something to the effect of, "Who's that playing on that?" And someone said, "Oh, that's you." He's like, "Damn, I sound good." I think it shows what a wonder of drumming it is on that track, that it even caught him by surprise. Following that is Deacon Blues, which is one of my favorite Steely Dan songs. It's the song of kind of an archetypal loser hipster figure who has kind of grandiose notions of the life he should be leading. And of course, it's got a fatalistic edge to it. He wants to become a jazz musician, but he's just doesn't have the chops, and he wants to live this life on the edge, but he just won't, That one features beautiful sax solos, and yeah, it's one of my favorite songs of theirs. Then that's followed by Peg, which is kind of one of the cult classics of Steely Dan. Most famous for the backing vocals of Michael McDonald. It's kind of almost become a bit of an internet meme in itself. It's for me, it's like the ultimate Michael McDonald showcase. He harmonizes with about 5 versions of himself to have this wall of sound backing vocals. But it's just a wonderful, tuneful song with beautiful jazzy kind of inflections. And again, amongst musicians, it's famous for the guitar solo by Jay Graydon. The story goes is that they auditioned nearly every session guitar player in Los Angeles, who all took a go at it, and one after the other they said no, until they got to Jay Graydon, who, legend has it, took about 2 or 3 passes at it, and that was it. Absolutely legendary solo. The album continues with Home at Last, which is kind of a reggae feel. From a musician's point of view, it features Bernard Purdie, the famous drummer who plays with everyone, Aretha Franklin, and the Jacksons, and thousands of other artists. But he uses his patented Purdie shuffle, which is this kind of halftime shuffle reggae feel that pops up on a lot of other famous songs of the era. I Got the News is kind of, for many, considered the weakest track. For me, it's a real barn burner with a few. It's slightly disjointed, granted, but the moments are wonderful in isolation. And it closes then with Josie, which is this real fun, peppy, funky track, which again features great guitar playing from Larry Carlton. and a solo from Walter Becker himself, who was coming into his own as a guitar player at the time. For many, this is the perfect Steely Dan record. It's kind of hard to argue with it. To be honest, it took me a little while to get into, because this is where they really left a lot of the kind of pop and soul elements of their music behind and went headlong into jazz rock. So it did take me a few goes to get into it, but once I did, I marveled at it, and I continue to. It's a 10 out of 10 album, wonderful. And I hope you, if you're going to listen to one album after this video, I hope it's Asia. There you go. Now we've come to the year 1980, and the last of the run of the first Steely Dan albums. They produced an album called Gaucho. Now this one is kind of divides a lot of opinions. For a lot of people, this is the ultimate Steely Dan album. It's where they finally crystallize into the jazz rock monsters that they always wanted to be. You know, absolute clinical studio perfection, state-of-the-art production techniques, out of this world session players, providing tight, no mistake performances. For a lot of people, that leaves a very sterile, cold sounding album. I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I mean, perfectionism is overrated in my eyes, but when it produces records and songs like this, you know, you kind of have to give it to Walter Becker and Donald Fagen on this one. For this one, it was kind of had a chaotic production. It moved between Los Angeles and New York City. At the time, unfortunately, Walter Becker was having some personal problems. In fact, his girlfriend ended up dying in a car crash at the time, which kind of led him to spiral in his with addiction issues. And Donald Fagen kind of took the reins and to try and produce something out of this. And what came out of it was Gaucho. They famously used a new piece of technology that was invented by their studio engineer, a kind of an early form of drum machine, which they call Wendell, which Donald Fagen was hoping would lead to far more accurate performances from the musicians if they were following a mechanical beat. Again, that's one that kind of divides opinion as to, you know, whether it kind of leaves the performances a bit sterile or not. But there's some absolutely classic songs on this. They open with Babylon Sisters, which again features the Purdie Shuffle from Bernard Purdie himself. Hey 19 is a big pop hit for them. It's about a classic Steely Dan scenario of an older man talking to younger people and trying to convince them of how cool he was or is or still is. But it kind of leaves a kind of a sleazy feeling, you know, after listening to it. Closes out with a tune called Glamour Profession, which is a bit of a cult classic for me. It's kind of them at their most icy perfection, obsessed. But the lyrics are phenomenal, and the story is very compelling. It's this kind of minimalist description of a drugs deal in this kind of seedy underworld of Los Angeles and professional sport. And it's one I go back to a lot. I think it's kind of, if there is a kind of a peak track on Gaucho, it's Glamour Profession for me. It kind of summarizes the feel of Gaucho. Over on side B, you have the title track, which features Jeff Porcaro on drums. That's another cult classic. And then Time Out of Mind, which probably is my favorite track on Gaucho, actually. It's a wonderful number. Famously features the guitar playing of Mark Knopfler from Dire Straits, who apparently was called into the studio by Becker and Fagen, just told to just start playing. And he was there for a couple of hours, played a load of solos, and they just kind of snipped it up and chopped it up, and that's what became Time Out of Mind. And then the album finishes out with 2 songs, My Rival and a leftover from the Royal Scam called Third World Man. There's some days that Gaucho is my favourite Steely Dan album. If I was honest, it would be down the rankings. Like, with these first 8 albums, there isn't a bad one, in my opinion. So the whole ranking thing is probably a bit null and void. If you ask me, it could be any of them. But for some people, this is their Steely Dan. It's definitely that, you know, that famous term yacht rock. If you're talking about yacht rock, I think this is them at their most yacht rock. You know, kind of cool, precise, professional, and very, very tuneful. So if that sounds good to you, try Gaucho. So I'd like to give you a little bonus feature from my vinyl collection at the end of this video. So after Gaucho, Becker and Fagen decided that they would just take a break from Steely Dan. I think they were both just burnt out from the experience of recording Gaucho, and they needed a break from each other. Walter Becker thankfully overcame his addiction issues and he went into record production. Donald Fagen decided, I'm going to try and have a solo career. And what came of it was in 1982's The Nightfly, which I must say has a very, very good album cover featuring Donald Fagen pretending to be a late night DJ, and there's lots of little nuggets around the place if you look hard enough. So for a lot of people, The Nightfly is kind of Gaucho part 2, but it's like kind of, if Gaucho's kind of like depressed Gaucho, Nightfly is like happy Gaucho. So you've got the kind of cool, icy, slick production, professional musicianship, but the songs are so much lighter. And I think Fagen was going through a real nostalgia time in his life, so a lot of the songs deal with, you know, growing up in the 1950s and 60s in America. And like, for example, the first track, IGY, I believe is International Geophysical Year, which I forget the year, but it was a year designated for kind of a vision of a global future. So they're talking about what's it going to be like in the future, like living in this utopia and all the wonderful things that they're going to see. Then over on side 2, it opens with New Frontier, which, you know, is a wonderful track. It's probably, I think it could be my favorite song on the album. It's all about, you know, young love and meeting up at the school prom and the dance and the girls that you fancy, but all the while with this kind of, he's talking about the dugout that his dad built, which kind of, just in case the Russians ever attack America. So that kind of nuclear fallout kind of feeling is kind of ominous in the background of a lot of these songs. I feel Donald Fagen is kind of letting himself be a bit more free on this one. So I think it's fair to include it with the Steely Dan appraisal. So there you go, Night Flight. So we've come to the end of my video dipping into my vinyl collection of Steely Dan and Steely Dan related material. I do hope you go away, and if you haven't listened to Steely Dan before, check out a couple of their tracks. Definitely go for the big hits, Really in the Years, Ricky Don't Lose That Number, Peg as a start. And if you dig those, just pick an album, delve into it. Like my recommendations would try Pretzel Logic and Asia. I think they're both kind of give you, Pretzel Logic gives you the kind of poppy early days with a mix of the jazz stuff, and then Asia gives you that like kind of peak Steely Dan jazz rock kind of sound. So thanks again for watching, and hopefully I'll see you again in another video. Have a good day, guys. Bye bye.